The staff member at the door smiled, the way people do when they've been told to be polite about something ugly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't on the list." Behind him, 200 white chairs faced an altar covered in hydrangeas, the blue-violet kind that only grow right in coastal Georgia if you plant them in acidic soil and talk to them like children. I knew this because Whitney had texted me about the hydrangeas 11 times in March. She did not text me about the guest list. I was holding a garment bag. Inside it was a backup bustle pin, a spool of ivory thread, and a miniature sewing kit I'd packed at 5 that morning, just in case the train snagged on a chair leg or the zipper caught on the beading near the hip, which it would, because I'd warned Whitney about that seam 3 times and she'd said, "It'll be fine, Tess, stop worrying." I drove 40 minutes to stop worrying in person. The man at the door looked at his clipboard again, like maybe my name had appeared in the last 4 seconds. It hadn't. I watched his pen hover over the R's. Rourke. It should have been right there between Robinson and Sawyer. But there was a line drawn through that space. Not a gap. A line. Someone had crossed me off. My ribs did something strange, tightened, then went still, like a held breath that forgot to release. Behind the man, through the open French doors, I could see the first rows filling up. The Hargroves on the left, our side on the right. Aunt Patty adjusting her hat. Cousin Devin on his phone. And somewhere inside, past the foyer and the string quartet warming up, my sister was standing in front of a full-length mirror, wearing the dress I had spent 92 days making by hand. 92 days. That's 3 months of 14-hour shifts in a studio that smells like sizing solution and cold coffee. 3 months of hand-beating a bodice at 2 in the morning because the light is different at 2 in the morning and you catch mistakes you'd miss at noon. 3 months of cutting French lace so fine it dissolved if you breathed on it wrong. I once sneezed during a fitting and lost an entire panel. The dress was worth $18,000. Whitney told the Hargroves it cost $40. I didn't learn that from Whitney. I learned it from the family group chat 3 months ago, when she posted a screenshot of a receipt from Elise Laurent's studio. New York, a designer that doesn't exist, for a price I never charged, because I never charged anything. Mom made sure of that. I turned to look for her, and she was already there. 6 feet away, in a seafoam suit with pearl buttons, standing beside a column like she'd been waiting. Not surprised. Not embarrassed. She was holding a program, the kind with a ribbon tied through the fold, and she looked at me the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth. Something you'd rather not deal with in front of company. Mom. She tilted her chin up. That meant she was about to say something she'd practiced. "We discussed this, Tessa. We didn't discuss anything. You sent a text at 11 p.m. saying the venue was at capacity. And it is. There are 40 empty chairs, Mom." I counted from the parking lot. She exhaled through her nose. A Diane Rourke specialty, the exhale that means you've embarrassed her by being correct. "We can't let a poor designer shame the family," she said. Not whispering. Not even trying to keep her voice down. The staff member suddenly found his clipboard very interesting. I looked at her. At the program in her hands. At the ribbon, which was blush pink. Because Whitney wanted blush pink everything. I had dyed that ribbon myself, actually. Whitney asked me to match it to the sash on the dress. I did. At midnight. In my kitchen sink. But that wasn't on the program credits. Something behind my sternum went flat. Not broken, I want to be precise about that. Flat. Like a note that stops resonating. Like the air had been let out of something I'd been inflating for 29 years. I looked past her, through the doors. The dress moved. Whitney, spinning for someone. A camera flash. The skirt caught the light and threw it back in that way silk charmeuse does. When the bias cut is right, and mine was right, because I'd recut it twice to make sure. I held the garment bag a little tighter. The emergency kit inside it was for her. I'd driven 40 minutes to protect a dress worn by a woman who told her in-laws it was made by someone who doesn't exist. So I smiled. Enjoy your day. I turned around, walked back to my car, and put the garment bag on the passenger seat like it was a person. I sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The engine was off. The parking lot was full of Hargrove sedans and rental SUVs, and one catering van from a company Whitney had also underpaid, though that's a different story. 92 days. That was how long it took to make the dress. It took my mother 6 words to unmake me. I drove the 40 minutes back to Savannah with both windows down because the air conditioning in my Civic had died in July, and I'd been too busy sewing a wedding dress to fix it. The October humidity hung on my forearms like damp cotton. Spanish moss blurred past on both sides of the highway, and somewhere around mile marker 14, the garment bag in the passenger seat shifted and the zipper jingled, and the sound was so small and so stupid that my throat closed. I didn't cry. I want that on the record. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth, a trick I learned at 15. The Thanksgiving. Diane told the table that Whitney had gotten into Florida State and that I was still figuring things out, which was her way of saying I'd chosen a sewing scholarship over a real degree, and I held it there until the feeling flattened into something I could drive with. The smell of the garment bag was what did it? Not the memory. The smell. Cedar and lavender from the drawer sachets I used to store muslin. Whitney used to steal those sachets and put them in her school locker because they smelled expensive. She was 14. I was 10. I'd made them by hand from fabric scraps and dried flowers from the backyard. When Diane found out, she said, "Let your sister have them, Tessa. You can always make more." I could always make more. Whitney needed a Halloween costume? Tessa could make one. Whitney tore her homecoming dress? Tessa could fix it. Whitney wanted a custom tote bag for her sorority rush? Tessa made 12, one for each pledge sister. Whitney didn't mention who made them. Diane had a phrase for it. She used it the way other mothers use "I love you" casually, without checking whether it landed. Whitney is the face. You're the hands. The hands, like I was a body part someone misplaced at a family reunion. Like Whitney was the store window and I was the back room where things got assembled. The metaphor worked for Diane because it meant she never had to credit me and never had to explain Whitney. It was efficient. I'll give her that. I graduated from SCAD Savannah College of Art and Design with a BFA in fibers and a concentration in textile construction. I paid for it myself. Scholarships, a work-study program in the costume department, and a weekend job hemming curtains for a retirement home in Thunderbolt. Diane did not attend the graduation ceremony. She sent a card that said, "Proud of you," with an exclamation point that somehow felt sarcastic. Whitney sent a text, "Congrats. Can you make me a dress for my anniversary dinner, BTW?" There was no question mark. It wasn't a question. The studio came later, a 12 by 14 room above Lorraine Mabry's fabric shop on Broughton Street. Lorraine was 67 and had been selling fabric in Savannah since before I was born. She gave me the space at a reduced rent because she said I reminded her of herself at 23, stubborn, talented, and catastrophically bad at charging people. It was Lorraine who taught me the thing about the signature. Not taught, exactly. Showed. One afternoon, maybe a year into my lease, she brought up a bolt of ivory charmeuse and laid it on my cutting table like it was a patient. She watched me run my hand across it. The weight of charmeuse is specific, heavy enough to drape, light enough to move, cool to the touch like water that hasn't decided if it's warm yet. You know, she said, peering over her reading glasses, every bridal designer worth a damn leaves a mark. Inside the corset, along the boning channel. Thread color that matches the lining so nobody sees it unless they're looking. She traced a seam with her thumbnail. The ones who don't sign their work get forgotten, and the ones who do well, the dress remembers, even if the bride doesn't. I started signing my pieces after that. A tiny monogram in silver thread, T, R. Tucked inside the corset, along the left boning channel, where it would lie against the bride's ribs. No one had ever found one. No one had ever looked. 3 months before the wedding, Whitney called. Not FaceTime, not text, an actual phone call, which meant she wanted something that required vocal manipulation. So Drew proposed. She said, like it was a weather report, and I need a dress. Congratulations, I said. Who's your designer? A pause. The kind of pause that has a price tag hanging off it. I was thinking. Whitney had met Drew Hargrove at a charity gala in Beaufort. The Hargroves owned a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of family that wintered in Sea Island and summered in Cashiers and used summer as a verb. Whitney had been working as a marketing coordinator for a tourism board, fine work, steady pay, nothing that would impress people who summer anywhere. But Drew loved her, or loved the version of her that showed up at galas. The dress was supposed to be simple. It became, as custom dresses always do, everything. French Alençon lace bodice, hand-beaded with seed pearls. Silk charmeuse skirt cut on the bias so it would pour instead of hang. A cathedral train that needed its own zip code. 92 days of my hands. The price, the real price, what I would charge any client who walked into my studio, was $18,400. Whitney's price was $0. Because family rate, Diane said when I hesitated. This is what family does, Tessa. I said yes, because the dress was my last try. I did not say that out loud, but I said it to myself in the mirror above my cutting table at 1 a.m, pinning the lace to the bodice form with hands that shook a little, not from exhaustion, but from something closer to prayer. If I made this dress beautiful enough, if the lace fell right and the beading caught the light and Whitney looked the way she was supposed to look, maybe Diane would see it. Not the dress. Me, the person who made it. Maybe she'd look at the dress and, for once, trace the line backward from the beauty to the hands. She didn't, of course. What she did was help Whitney lie. 3 months before the wedding, the family group chat lit up. Whitney posted a photo of a receipt, Elise Laurent studio across the top. Address on Spring Street, Soho. Amount, $40,000. Diane replied with 3 heart emojis and the words, worth every penny. The Hargroves had given Whitney the money for the dress. $40,000. Transferred to an account, I later learned, was Whitney's personal checking. There was no Elise Laurent. There was no studio on Spring Street. There was only me, in my 12 by 14 room above a fabric shop in Savannah, sewing for free while my sister pocketed $40,000 for work she couldn't thread a needle to do herself. I saw the receipt. I did the math. I said nothing, because the dress was almost done, and I still wanted to believe. I finished it on a Tuesday at 2 a.m. I held it up under the fluorescent light of my studio, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever made, for the most ungrateful people I had ever known. The studio was dark when I got back. Not because the power was out. The fluorescent over the cutting table had been flickering for 2 weeks, and I kept forgetting to replace it, the way you keep forgetting things that only matter to you. I turned it on, and it buzzed and stammered, like it was trying to say something and couldn't get the words out. I knew the feeling. The mannequin stood in the corner where the dress used to hang. Bare now, headless, armless, the color of old cream. I'd bought it secondhand from a bridal shop in Thunderbolt that went under during COVID, and its left shoulder was slightly higher than the right, which meant everything I draped on it pulled a quarter inch to the east. I'd adjusted for that tilt so many times that I sometimes adjusted for it in dresses that were on different mannequins. Habit is a strange kind of loyalty. I sat down at the cutting table and opened my phone. The group chat had 23 new messages. Photos, mostly. Whitney in front of the altar. Whitney and Drew. Whitney and Diane, cheek to cheek, both holding champagne. The dress moved through every photo like a living thing. The train fanned out across stone tile, the bodice catching afternoon light through stained glass, the skirt swaying with a weight that only real charmeuse has. Silk charmeuse doesn't lie. It doesn't hold a shape it doesn't believe in. No one in the chat mentioned the designer. No one mentioned me. There were 47 emoji reactions, and not one of them had my name next to it. I had been erased so completely that it looked effortless, like I had never been in the frame to begin with. I set the phone face down on the table. The bolt of ivory Charmeuse Lorraine had left for me last week was still there, wrapped in tissue paper, untouched. I put my hand on it. The fabric was cool and impossibly smooth, the kind of smooth that makes your fingerprints feel coarse. I pressed my palm flat against it and held it there, and the coolness traveled up through my wrist and into the part of my chest that had gone flat in the parking lot, and for a moment, the two temperatures, the cold of the charmeuse and the nothing in my chest, matched, and that was almost worse than crying. 3 weeks before the wedding, 2 a.m, I was sitting in this exact chair, in this exact light, with a magnifying lamp clamped to the table edge. The lace on the neckline had puckered a tension issue in the bobbin thread that I'd missed during the first pass. It was the kind of error only I would notice. Whitney certainly wouldn't. Drew's family wouldn't. A guest might run her finger across the neckline and feel a slight ridge and think nothing of it. But I would know. So I sat there, alone, in a building where the only sounds were the refrigerator downstairs in Lorraine's shop and the occasional car on Broughton Street, and I pulled the stitching out with a seam ripper and redid it, stitch by stitch, for a woman who hadn't called to ask how the dress was going. Not once, not in 92 days. I did it because the lace deserved better, and because I still believed, at 2 a.m, with no audience, that making something perfect for someone might be the same as being loved by them. It isn't. For the record, a knock on the studio door. I hadn't locked it, which was either careless or hopeful. I'll let you decide. Lorraine came in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner that puts too much sugar in everything and doesn't apologize for it. She set one in front of me without asking if I wanted it. She looked at the bare mannequin. She looked at me. So they wore it. They wore it. And they told the man at the door I wasn't good enough to watch. Lorraine sat down on the stool across from me. She was wearing the same linen apron she wore in the shop, the one with the measuring tape still looped through the pocket, and she picked up her coffee and blew on it even though it was already lukewarm. "When are you going to send the invoice?" she said. I almost laughed. "It was free, Lorraine. Family rate." She took a sip, set the cup down, looked at me over the rims of her glasses, the look she reserved for bad hemlines and worse decisions. "Nothing is free, baby. You just haven't counted the cost yet." I opened my mouth to explain that you can't invoice your own mother, that billing your sister for a wedding dress would make you the villain in every version of the story, that the word family is a lock and a key, and sometimes both at the same time. But Lorraine was already looking at the wall behind me, where I'd framed my business license next to a photo of my first completed commission, a bridesmaid dress for a stranger in Tybee Island who'd cried when she saw it and said, You made me look like the person I want to be. Below the frame, on a shelf, sat the stack of letterhead I'd designed myself, Tessa Rourke Atelier, in clean serif type. Logo, a single needle trailing a curved thread. I'd printed 500 sheets 2 years ago. I had used maybe 30, all for strangers, never for family. You know what the difference is between a seamstress and a designer, Lorraine said. I waited. A seamstress takes orders. A designer names her price. She finished her coffee, stood up, and left without another word. The door clicked behind her. The fluorescent buzzed. The charmeuse cooled under my palm. I sat there for a long time. Then I pulled the letterhead toward me and looked at my own name. Have you ever made something beautiful for someone who never once said thank you? Because I had. For 29 years, and I was starting to think the most expensive thing I ever made wasn't the dress. It was the silence I kept while they wore it. I didn't send the invoice that night. First, I needed to do the math. Not the emotional math. I'd been running that equation for 29 years, and the answer was always the same: deficit. I mean, the actual math. The dollars and hours, labor and materials. What would I charge a stranger math? Because if I was going to bill my sister for a wedding dress, I was going to do it right. Itemized. Professional. The kind of invoice that doesn't leave room for, but we're family. I opened my laptop and pulled up the pricing model I use for custom commissions. I'd built it on a spreadsheet 2 years ago, after Lorraine caught me charging a client $1,200 for a dress that took me 6 weeks and said, "Baby, that's not a rate. That's a cry for help." Design consultation. 4 sessions with Whitney over FaceTime, each lasting approximately 90 minutes, during which she changed her mind about the neckline 3 times, the sleeve situation twice, and the train length once, because she saw a photo of Meghan Markle and decided cathedral was more her. Consultation fee, $1,600. Materials: 14 yards of silk charmeuse at $85 per yard. 6 yards of French Alençon lace at $220 per yard. Seed pearls, hand-selected, 412 of them. Horsehair braid for the hem. Boning for the corset. Silk organza for the lining. Thread 3 different weights, because the bodice, the skirt, and the beading all require different tensions, and if you use the wrong thread on the wrong seam, the whole thing will pucker within 6 months. Materials total, $4,200. Labor, 92 days at an average of 9 hours per day. Not every day was 9 hours. Some were 14. Some were 4, depending on whether I was cutting, draping, beading, or staring at a seam and trying to figure out why it hated me. But 9 was the honest average. At my standard hourly rate for custom bridal work, which is, for the record, exactly what other independent bridal designers in the Southeast charge labor total, $12,600. Grand total, $18,400. I stared at the number. It looked enormous and completely fair at the same time. Like seeing your own reflection after a long time and thinking, oh, that's what I look like. Then I opened the group chat and scrolled back to the screenshot Whitney had posted 3 months ago. Elise Laurent Studio. The receipt was formatted like a real one: invoice number, date, itemized line items. It listed custom bridal gown, hand-beaded, French lace, and a total of $40,000. At the bottom, thank you for choosing Elise Laurent. We look forward to dressing you. I'd looked at this receipt in March and felt my stomach fold in half. Not because of the lie, I hadn't fully processed the lie yet, but because the line items were close enough to real that Whitney had clearly used my work as a template. She'd copied my descriptions. She'd inflated my numbers. She'd built her fiction on my facts. Now I opened a browser tab and typed, Elise Laurent, Bridal Designer, New York. Nothing. No website, no Instagram, no Yelp listing, no business registration with New York State. I tried Elise Laurent Spring Street, Soho. Nothing. I tried just Elise Laurent Designer, a perfumi brand in France. A character in a novel from 2014. No bridal designer, not anywhere, not ever. Whitney had invented her. An entire designer, conjured out of nothing, to cover the fact that her sister, the poor one, the hands, the one who wasn't good enough to attend the wedding, had made the dress everyone was complimenting. I closed the browser tab, opened my invoicing software, and started typing. My phone rang. Whitney. I almost didn't answer. But there's a version of me that still picks up when family calls, the way some people still flinch at a sound that hasn't hurt them in years. Hey, her voice was honeymoon bright, that particular frequency Whitney uses when she's about to ask for something while pretending she isn't. So the reception was amazing, but there's a tiny snag on the train. Like a pulled thread? Drew's mom keeps looking at it, and I know it's driving her crazy. Can you fix it when we get back? I held the phone away from my face and looked at it. Really looked at it. She had uninvited me from the wedding, watched our mother call me a poor designer in front of a stranger with a clipboard, pocketed $40,000 for a dress I made for free, and was now, 4 days later, calling to request alterations. Tess? You there? Yeah, I said. So, can you fix it? It's just the train. Shouldn't take long. My customer service hours are officially over, I thought. What I said was, I'll send you my repair rates. Your what? My rates. For repair work. I'll email them. Silence. The kind of silence that means someone is recalculating a relationship. Tessa, it's a pulled thread. Then, it should be affordable. She hung up. I went back to the invoice. Tessa Rourke Atelier. Logo, single needle, curved thread. Addressed to Whitney Rourke Hargrove. Itemized. Consultation, materials, labor. Total due $18,400. Payment terms, net 30. I CC'd Diane, not because she owed the money, because she owed the acknowledgement. She had orchestrated the free labor. She had stood at the door and smiled. She should see what free looks like when it comes with a number attached. I did not CC the Hargroves. That was deliberate. I wasn't trying to blow up Whitney's life. I was trying to do something much smaller and much harder. I was trying to tell the truth about what my work was worth, to the people who had decided it was worth nothing. Lorraine stopped by around 4. She didn't knock. She had a key to the building and a policy of using it whenever she smelled coffee or crisis, and my studio currently contained both. She stood behind me and looked at the laptop screen, the invoice, formatted and ready to send, $18,400. She put her hand on my shoulder, squeezed once. Now you're a designer, she said. I hit send at 9:47 on a Monday morning. By 9:48, the email had left my outbox, traveled through whatever series of servers and satellites and underwater cables connect Savannah, Georgia, to wherever Whitney was drinking rum punch on a beach in Antigua, and landed in 2 inboxes simultaneously. By 9:52, my phone started ringing. Not Whitney. Mom. Diane Rourke does not yell. I want to clarify that up front because people assume that toxic mothers are screamers, that there's a volume to the damage, something you can point to and say, see? That's the bad part. Diane doesn't yell. She modulates. She lowers her voice to a register that makes you lean in, and once you're leaning in, you've already conceded something. What do you think you're doing? She said. Not a question. A deposition. Billing for services rendered, I said. I was standing at my cutting table with the phone on speaker, both hands flat on the surface, because I'd learned a long time ago that if my hands were busy cutting fabric, pinning muslin, pressing seams, my voice stayed steady. Empty hands made me vulnerable, so I pressed them into the wood and let the grain hold me up. Services rendered, she repeated. She made the word sound ridiculous, the way she could make any word sound ridiculous if she disagreed with its premise. She once made the word boundaries sound like a slur. You made a dress for your sister's wedding. A gift that cost me 92 days and $18,000 in labor and materials. And your sister gave you the honor of dressing her on the most important day of her life. She gave me the honor from a building I wasn't allowed to enter. Diane exhaled. The exhale. I could hear her rearranging her strategy in real time, the tiny click of her jaw resetting, the way a typewriter carriage returns to the left margin before starting a new line. If you don't withdraw this invoice, she said, you are no longer part of this family. I looked at the mannequin in the corner, the bare one, the one that had held Whitney's dress for 3 months and now stood empty in a room full of fabric that nobody had paid for. I wasn't on the guest list, Mom. I think you already made that decision. She hung up without saying goodbye. Diane Rourke does not say goodbye. She simply removes herself from the conversation, the way she removed my name from the seating chart cleanly, without ceremony, as though the space had always been empty. Whitney called 20 minutes later. I was eating a granola bar from the vending machine in the hallway outside Lorraine's shop dinner. Technically, though calling it dinner was generous. My phone lit up and her contact photo appeared. A selfie from 2 Christmases ago, both of us in matching reindeer sweaters that Diane had bought for Whitney and that Whitney had given me the spare because it was a little too big. It was not too big. It was my size. Whitney is a 4. I am an 8. She knew that. Tessa. She was crying. Whitney cries the way some people play piano technically proficient, emotionally precise, each note calibrated to produce a specific response in the listener. I don't mean she was faking. I mean she'd had 29 years of practice, and practice makes perfect even when the subject is tears. I can't believe you would do this to me, she said. On my honeymoon, I sent an invoice, Whitney. I didn't set anything on fire. It's the same thing. If Drew sees this, if he starts asking questions about the dress, she stopped. I waited. In the silence, I could hear waves, which meant she was outside, on a beach, in Antigua, on a honeymoon paid for by a family she had lied to. If Drew starts asking about the dress, I said, what happens? He'll ask about Elise Laurent. And that's complicated. It's not complicated, Whitney. There is no Elise Laurent. You made her up. You took $40,000 from the Hargroves for a dress that cost them 0 because you told me it was free. Another silence. Longer. The waves filled it. Where did the $40,000 go? I asked. That's between me and my husband. It's between you and the truth. And right now, your truth has an itemized invoice attached to it. She hung up. Not with Diane's clean severance, more like dropping something hot. I could almost hear the phone hitting the lounge chair. I finished the granola bar. It tasted like compressed sawdust and obligation. I dropped the wrapper in the trash and went back into the studio, and the fluorescent light was still flickering, and the mannequin was still bare, and the charmeuse was still on the table, and nothing in the room had changed except me. Diane called again at 7:14 p.m. Different strategy. She was crying now. Diane Rourke cries even less frequently than she yells. So when the tears come out, they're meant to end wars. After everything I did for you girls, she said. Her voice was wet and wounded and expertly paced. I gave you both everything. I sacrificed, you have no idea what I sacrificed. I sat on the stool and listened. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted to hear the whole performance. The way you sit through the end of a bad movie, because you've already paid for the ticket. I drove you to your sewing classes. I let you use the basement for your little projects. I was the one who told Whitney to ask you for the dress in the first place. You told her to ask me because you knew I'd do it for free. Because that's what family does, Tessa. She said does like it was a brick. Like the word itself could build a wall around me. Family also invites each other to weddings, I said. Family doesn't stand at the door and call their daughter a poor designer. Family doesn't help one daughter steal $40,000 while the other daughter works for free. Nobody stole anything. There's a fake receipt in the group chat, Mom. Elise Laurent. You replied with 3 hearts and worth every penny. You knew. The crying stopped. Just like that. Like a faucet turned off. And in the dry silence that followed, I heard something I'd never heard before in 30 years of Diane Rourke phone calls. Nothing. Not a strategy. Not a redirect. Not an exhale. Just the sound of a woman who had run out of scripts. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then the jaw clicked again. If you pursue this, she said, voice flat and operational, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you are. She hung up. I put the phone face down on the cutting table. The charmeuse was cool under my wrist. I pressed my forearm against it and breathed. The text came at 10:30 that night. From Megan. A girl I'd gone to high school with, who still lived in Beaufort, and followed everyone's mother on Facebook because she treated social media like a spectator sport. Hey! Not sure if you've seen this, but your mom posted something. Thought you should know. She attached a screenshot. Diane's Facebook post. Public. Profile picture. Her and Whitney at the wedding. Champagne, cheek to cheek. The post was 3 paragraphs long, written in that particular style of Southern mother grief that reads like a church bulletin authored by a martyr. It is with a heavy heart that I share what our family is going through. After Whitney's beautiful wedding, her sister Tessa has decided to send an invoice for the dress she volunteered to make as a gift. She is now demanding $18,000 from a newlywed couple on their honeymoon. Please keep our family in your prayers as we navigate this painful situation. 214 likes. 89 comments. I scrolled through a few. So sad when jealousy tears families apart. Some people can't stand to see their siblings happy. Praying for Whitney and Drew, my hands went cold. Not the charmeuse cold, a different cold, the kind that starts at the fingertips and crawls inward like frost on a windshield. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. My vision narrowed to the size of the phone screen, and inside that screen, I was the villain. The jealous sister. The failed designer shaking down her own family for money. Diane had been right about one thing. She did make sure everyone knew what kind of daughter I was. She just got to write the description first. I sat in the studio for a long time after that. The fluorescent light finally gave up and went dark, and I didn't replace it. I sat in the glow of my phone screen, reading comments from people who didn't know me, who had never seen the inside of my studio, or the thread count on that lace, or the way silk charmeuse moves when the bias cut is right, and I thought, maybe she wins. Maybe the story is already written and I'm just the footnote, the jealous hands, the ungrateful body part. Lorraine found me like that the next morning. She replaced the fluorescent tube she kept spares in the shop because she said fluorescent lights were like men, unreliable but occasionally necessary. And when the new one hummed to life and the room turned white again, she looked at my face and then at my phone, still open to Diane's post. She read it. All of it. The post, the comments, the emoji reactions from strangers who had decided I was the villain based on 3 paragraphs written by a woman who had never once visited my studio. Then she set the phone down, screen first, on the cutting table. "You know what I've learned in 40 years of selling fabric?" she said. I shook my head. People will believe whatever story gets told first. But the truth doesn't need to be first. It just needs to be louder. She tapped the edge of my laptop, and an invoice with your name, your logo, and your work itemized line by line? That's pretty loud, baby. I looked at the mannequin. Bare. Headless. Tilted slightly to the left, the way it always tilted, the way I always adjusted for. And I thought about the signature. Silver thread. T. R. Inside the corset, along the left boning channel, pressed against my sister's ribs for her entire wedding day. The dress knew who made it, even if nobody else did. In the stories they told about me, I was the villain, the jealous sister, the failed designer trying to profit off family. But I had something they didn't count on. I had the dress, and the dress had my name inside it. The voicemails started on Tuesday. Diane left 14 in 1 hour. I didn't listen to them in real time. I played them back later, sitting cross-legged on the studio floor with a cup of Lorraine's Too Sweet coffee, and it was like listening to a woman audition for 5 different roles in the same play. Voicemail 1. Tears. Tessa, please. I'm your mother. Don't do this. Voicemail 4. Legal threats. I've spoken to a lawyer. You can't bill family for a gift. This is harassment. Voicemail 7. Bargaining. What if Whitney pays you something? A smaller amount? Can we work this out privately? Voicemail 11. Back to threats. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I will make sure you never work in this town again. Voicemail 14. Just a long exhale. 10 seconds of breath, then a click. It was like emotional roulette. I half expected voicemail 15 to be in a completely different language. Or maybe just static. Maybe by voicemail 20, she'd circle all the way back to tears, and we'd start the whole carousel over again. I set the phone down and looked at the ceiling. A water stain near the corner had been spreading slowly for months. It looked like a map of a country that didn't exist yet. I thought about how many things in my life looked like that, shapes without names, outlines of places I hadn't been allowed to visit. Then my phone rang. Not Diane's number, not Whitney's. A 912 area code Savannah, but not one I recognized. Miss Rourke? A woman's voice. Clear, unhurried. The kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself because it had always been listened to. This is Tessa. My name is Ruth Hargrove. I believe you made my daughter-in-law's wedding dress. My hand tightened around the phone. Not fear something closer to the feeling you get when a teacher calls your name and you don't know if you're in trouble or about to be praised. I did, I said. Funny, Ruth said. Because the receipt my family paid for says a woman named Elise Laurent made it, out of a studio on Spring Street in Soho. A pause. Not an empty one, a loaded one. The kind of pause that has already drawn its conclusions and is waiting for you to catch up. Elise Laurent doesn't seem to exist. Miss Rourke. I sat down on the stool. No, I said. She doesn't. I thought not. My son-in-law happened to mention at brunch last weekend that you'd sent Whitney an invoice. Whitney told him it was a joke, a misunderstanding between sisters. Drew believed her, because Drew believes most things Whitney says, which is a separate conversation I intend to have with my son in due time. It sounded like a price, and prices interest me. Ruth Hargrove, I would later learn, had been the chief financial officer of her husband's logistics company for 22 years before retiring. She did not use words like misunderstanding without auditing them first. "So, I did what I do when a number doesn't add up," she continued. I looked at the dress. My breath caught. Not dramatically, just a small hitch, like a needle snagging on a thread. I had Whitney's dress brought to my house. Told her I wanted to photograph the details for a family album. She was delighted. She loves being photographed. A note of dryness there, just a trace. I took the dress to my tailor, a woman I've used for 30 years, and I asked her to examine the construction. The lining, the beading, the seams. And she found something interesting. I closed my eyes. Inside the corset, Ruth said, along the left boning channel, a monogram in silver thread, T. R. Chekhov, you beautiful old playwright. My tailor said it's a designer's signature, a mark of authorship. She said only a trained couturier would know to place it there. Ruth paused. She also said whoever made that dress was extremely talented. She used the word extraordinary, and Patricia does not use that word for anything, including her grandchildren. I opened my eyes. The mannequin was still bare. The fluorescent was still humming, but the room felt different. The way a room feels different when someone opens a window you didn't know was there. I searched your name, Ruth said. Tessa Rourke Atelier. You have a website. It's modest, but your portfolio is not. You've been featured in Savannah magazine. You won an Emerging Designer Award from the Bridal Association of the Southeast 2 years ago. Another pause. You are not a poor designer, Miss Rourke. You are an excellent one. I couldn't speak for a moment. Not because I was emotional, or not only because I was emotional, but because no one in my family had ever said the word excellent in the same sentence as my name. Diane had said talented once, at a Thanksgiving, and it had sounded like a diagnosis. Mrs. Hargrove. Ruth. I didn't send the invoice to cause problems for your family. I sent it because my sister wore a dress I made for free, while she told your family it cost $40,000 from a designer who doesn't exist. And my mother stood at the door of the wedding and told a man with a clipboard that I wasn't good enough to come inside. A silence. But not the cold kind. Not the Whitney silence or the Diane silence. A listening silence. The silence of a person who is taking inventory. I paid $40,000, Ruth said slowly, for a dress made by a woman my daughter-in-law uninvited from the wedding, and the woman who actually made it is charging $18,000, which means my family has been defrauded of $40,000 by the bride. She said it without heat. That was the most devastating part, the absence of drama. Ruth Hargrove didn't need to yell. She had arithmetic. How much is the dress actually worth? She asked. $18,400. That's the fair market price for 92 days of custom work. Then that is what I will pay you. Directly. The $40,000 is between my son and his wife, but the woman who made the dress should be paid by the people who wore it. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Thank you, I said. It came out smaller than I expected. Don't thank me, Ruth said. Thank your own hands. They're the only honest ones in this entire arrangement. After we hung up, I sat in the studio and the silence was different. Not the fluorescent silence of loneliness, not the phone screen silence of being the villain, a different kind. The silence after a storm breaks, and you realize the roof held. The domino started tipping that same evening. Drew called Whitney. I wasn't on the call, I didn't need to be. Whitney told me later, in one of the 98 calls I would eventually not answer, that Drew came back from a walk on the beach and asked her, quietly, with the voice of a man holding something fragile, "Who is Elise Laron?" Whitney tried. She cried. She said it was complicated, that her sister was jealous, that the invoice was revenge. Drew listened. Then he said, "My mother found the designer's signature inside the corset. The dress was made by your sister. The receipt was fake. Where is the $40,000, Whitney?" She didn't have an answer that didn't involve the truth. And the truth was a $40,000 hole in the foundation of a marriage that was 6 days old. Diane tried to intervene. She called Ruth Hargrove directly mother to mother, she said, to clear the air. Ruth listened for approximately 90 seconds, then said, "Mrs. Rourke, a misunderstanding is forgetting a name on a guest list. This is fraud," and hung up. If someone called you a poor designer while wearing your work, what would you do? Because here's what I learned. You don't have to do anything. You just have to have done good work. The work speaks, the thread holds, and the signature, eventually, is found. The $40,000 unraveled faster than cheap thread, and with it, every lie Whitney had stitched into her new life. Drew Hargrove called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was pinning muslin to a dress form for a commission I'd taken from a woman in Bluffton, a mother of the bride dress, which felt like the universe's idea of a joke, and I almost didn't pick up because I'd stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize. But this one had a Beaufort prefix, and something about the way it rang twice, then stopped, then rang again, suggested a person who wasn't sure they should be calling. "Is this Tessa? The designer?" "It is." "This is Drew. I'm Whitney's husband." He said it the way you say a word you've just learned and aren't sure you're pronouncing correctly. "I wanted to ask you something, and I'm going to sound like an idiot, but how much does a wedding dress actually cost? Like, a real one?" "From a real person." I pulled a pin from the muslin and held it between my teeth. "A habit. Lorraine says it'll kill me someday. I say there are faster ways to go." "It depends on the dress," I said, around the pin. "Off the rack, you're looking at 2,000 to 5,000. Semi-custom, 5 to 10. Fully custom, hand-beaded, French lace, cathedral train, you're in the 15 to 25 range. Higher if the designer's name is famous." "And yours?" "For Whitney's? 18.4. That's what I invoiced." A long exhale. Not a Diane exhale, there was no theater in it. Just a man sitting with a number that was $22,000 smaller than the one he'd been told. "More than a lie," I said. "Less than a marriage, apparently." Drew laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind that leaks out when the alternative is worse. "Yeah," he said. "That checks out." He asked me a few more questions, practical ones, about the materials, the timeline, whether 18,000 was a normal price or whether I'd inflated it. I answered each one honestly. He thanked me the way you thank a doctor who's just read you a scan you didn't want to hear, and hung up. I took the pin out of my teeth and stuck it into the muslin. My hands were steady. Whitney called that evening. Not the honeymoon Whitney, not the crying Whitney, not the Whitney who deploys tears like ordnance. A different Whitney. Quieter. The voice under all the other voices, the one that exists when no one's watching and there's no script and the performance has ended and you're just a person sitting in the wreckage of a thing you built out of lies because you didn't think the truth was enough. "Tess, Whitney, I know you're not going to believe me." I waited. Outside the studio window, Broughton Street was doing its evening thing, couples walking toward restaurants, a busker with a banjo on the corner, the smell of fried shrimp from the place 2 doors down. The world continuing. "I didn't plan it," she said. "The 40,000. It wasn't I didn't wake up one day and decide to steal. It started small. Drew's mom asked where I was getting the dress, and I panicked. I didn't want to say my sister was making it in a studio above a fabric shop. I wanted them to think I belonged in their world. So I made up a name, and then they offered to pay. And the number kept getting bigger, and I let it happen. You fabricated a receipt, Whitney. You created a fake designer with a fake address. That's not letting something happen. That's building something. I know. Her voice cracked. Not the practice crack. A real one, the sound of dry wood splitting. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted one perfect day. I wanted them to think I was someone. And there it was. The thing under the thing. Whitney Rourke Hargrove, golden child. The face, the one who danced in the center of the room. She had looked at the Hargroves' world and felt exactly what I had felt, looking at ours. Not enough. She had stood in front of a mirror in a $40,000 fiction and thought, if the dress is expensive enough, maybe I'll finally belong. She was wrong, of course. But I understood the math. I'd been running a version of it myself, not with money, but with labor. If I make something beautiful enough for them, maybe they'll see me. We were both wrong. The difference was I'd paid in time and she'd paid in someone else's money. You could have just told them the truth, I said. That your sister made it. That would have been enough. A pause. Then, very quietly, it wouldn't have been enough for Mom. I closed my eyes. Because she was right. Diane had built us both, Whitney, into a face that needed to perform. Me into hands that needed to produce. Whitney lied because Diane taught her that image was more valuable than truth. I sewed for free because Diane taught me that love had to be earned with labor. We were both her architecture. We just lived on different floors. But understanding is not the same as forgiving. I want to be clear about that. Understanding is an intellectual exercise. Forgiveness is a door, and I wasn't ready to open it. Maybe someday, but not because she'd asked. Because I'd decided. I'm not withdrawing the invoice, I said. I know. And I'm not going to pretend Elise Laurent is real. I know. But I'm not trying to destroy your marriage, Whitney. I'm trying to get paid for my work. Those are different things. She was quiet for a while. The banjo outside had switched to something slow and minor key. Then she said, "The dress really was beautiful, Tess." "I know," I said. "I made it." We hung up. I don't know if it was a goodbye or a pause. I don't know if we'll speak again in a week or a year or ever. But it was the first honest conversation we'd had since I was 10 years old, sitting behind a curtain, sewing sachets for a sister who never asked where they came from. The money arrived the next morning. A wire transfer, $18,400. 00 from Ruth Hargrove, with a memo line that read, "Invoice has shown 02, Tessa Rourke, Atelier Custom Bridal Gown." Below that, a separate email from Ruth, "For the most beautiful dress at the wedding, made by the only honest person in the room who wasn't even allowed in." I sat in my studio and stared at the number on the screen. $18,400. It was the first time someone had paid me what my work was worth. Not a family rate. Not a favor. Not a gift wrapped in guilt and called love. A price. My price. I looked at the wall where Lorraine's words lived, written on a scrap of muslin I'd pinned there months ago, in handwriting that wasn't mine. A seamstress takes orders. A designer names her price. I finally understood what she meant. It was never about the money. It was about the naming. It was about standing in front of your own work and saying, "This is what it costs." Not because you're greedy, because you're real, because your hands made something, and your hands have a name, and your name has a number, and the number is not 0. The number is not 0. It was the last time I would ever sew for free. Here is what happened to the people who told me I wasn't good enough to enter a building that wore my work on its body. Whitney did not get divorced, not immediately. The timeline of stories Whitney had told his family about her career, her savings, her background. Some of them held up, most of them didn't. I don't know what their marriage looks like now, and I've decided that's not my story to tell. I know that trust, once cracked, doesn't heal the way bones do. Bones grow back stronger. Trust just grows back thinner. Diane's Facebook post stayed up for 11 days before she deleted it. By then, someone in the comments, I never found out who had replied with a link to my website, my portfolio, the Savannah Magazine feature, the Bridal Association Award. The comment said, "Wait, so the daughter you called a poor designer actually made the dress? And she won awards for her work?" Ma'am, it had 237 likes. Diane's original post had 214. The math was not in her favor. She called me once more after that. I let it go to voicemail. She said, "I think we should talk." She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she was wrong. She said, "I think we should talk the way a general says we should negotiate from a position she still believed was strength, but was, in fact, the last chair in an empty room." I did not call her back. Not because I was punishing her, because I had nothing left to say that an invoice hadn't already said better. Ruth Hargrove, true to her word, did something I hadn't expected. She gave my name to 6 women in her circle, mothers of brides, grandmothers of debutantes, one woman who wanted a custom christening gown for her first grandchild. She didn't do it as charity. She did it as recommendation. "I know a designer in Savannah," she told them. "She's the real thing." The first call came on a Wednesday. A woman named Caroline, from Hilton Head, whose daughter was getting married the following spring. "Mrs. Hargrove gave me your name," Caroline said. "She told me you made the most extraordinary dress she'd ever seen." "I did," I said. I was standing at my cutting table, one hand on the bolt of charmeuse. Lorraine had left for me, cool under my palm. "Steady. What's your rate?" I smiled. Not the smile from the parking lot, the one I'd used to keep from breaking in front of a man with a clipboard. This one was different. This one came from somewhere lower, somewhere warmer, the place where work and worth meet and finally agree on a number. "Let me send you my pricing sheet," I said. After I hung up, I stood in the studio for a minute. The fluorescent hummed the new one Lorraine had installed, steady and white. The mannequin stood in the corner, still bare, still tilted slightly to the left. On the passenger side hook by the door, where I'd hung it the night I drove back from the wedding, was the garment bag. I walked over and unzipped it. And the miniature sewing kit I'd packed at 5 in the morning on the day my sister got married, just in case something went wrong with the dress. I'd driven 40 minutes to protect a dress for a woman who didn't want me in the room. I'd packed an emergency kit for a person who considered my presence the emergency. I took out the small pair of scissors, German steel, sharp enough to cut charmeuse without dragging, and carried them to the cutting table. I smoothed the ivory charmeuse flat. Lorraine had left a note with it, written on a receipt in her terrible handwriting, "For your next client, not your next apology." I placed the scissors on the fabric, aligned the grain, and made the first cut. The phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it. 98 missed calls. I hadn't counted them, Megan had, because Megan counted everything, but I'd seen the number climb over the past week like a thermometer nobody wanted to read. 98 calls from Diane and Whitney, and one from a Beaufort number that was probably Aunt Patty, recruited for the cause. I didn't listen to them. I didn't delete them. Maybe someday I'd pick up. Maybe someday there would be a voicemail that started with the right words, not "how dare you," or "after everything I've done," or "you're destroying this family," but something smaller and harder and truer. Something that sounded less like a strategy and more like a person. But not today. Today, I had charmeuse on the table and scissors in my hand, and a client who had asked for my pricing sheet and said thank you before we'd even started. The morning light came through the studio window and caught the fabric and turned it to water. I cut along the bias, the way I always do, slow, steady, letting the blade follow the grain instead of fighting it. The charmeuse fell open like a breath, like a door, like the first page of something that hadn't been written yet. What are you still making for free for people who don't value your hands? Whatever it is, stop. Name your price. Send the invoice. The dress will remember who made it, even if they don't. Here's what Tessa's story taught me, and I think it might matter to you too. Somewhere along the way, most of us learned that love means giving without counting. That if you're good enough, generous enough, quiet enough, the people closest to you will eventually see your value. So you keep sewing. You keep showing up at 5 in the morning with an emergency kit for people who never once asked how you were doing. You call it loyalty. You call it family. You call it love. But what you're really doing is setting your own price at 0 and then wondering why no one offers more. Tessa didn't get her $18,400 because she screamed or begged or burned anything down. She got it because she did something that sounds simple but feels almost impossible when you've spent your whole life being the hands. She named her price. She put her work on paper, attached a number, and sent it to the people who had been wearing her labor like it cost nothing. That invoice wasn't revenge. It was an introduction. It said, "This is who I am, this is what I do, and this is what it's worth." So let me ask you something. What are you still doing for free? What skill, what time, what emotional labor are you handing over to someone who has never once said thank you, and would you even know how to stop? Think about it. Really think. And if a name comes to mind, if a face flashes behind your eyes right now,